Let's also take a look at the deal that drove Stephen Guilbeault from Cabinet, a deal that paves a clearer path for a potential pipeline to the BC coast. The deal includes Alberta submitting its proposal for that pipeline to the Major Projects Office by July 1st, 2026. The commitments as part of this deal include the construction of one or more privately funded pipelines, Indigenous co-ownership of the project, and collaboration with British Columbia. Plus, the pipeline will not be able to move forward without the Pathways carbon capture project also moving forward. Now, as part of this memorandum of understanding, Ottawa has agreed to repeal or scale back a series of environmental regulations in Alberta, such as scrapping the idea of an oil and gas emissions cap, suspending clean electricity regulations specifically in Alberta, and being willing to adjust the oil tanker ban along BC's coast as necessary. And while those environmental measures have been scrapped or scaled back, Alberta has committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, increasing its own industrial carbon price and, of course, helping construct that Pathways carbon capture project. But there's still a lot more to sort out before Alberta's pipeline dream can become a reality.
Just to be clear, this agreement today between Alberta and the Government of Canada, it's the first step. It's an example of cooperative federalism. We're agreeing in partnership and in a spirit of trust. But what has to happen, several things have to happen before a pipeline is built. And one of those is a private sector proponent. If there's not a private sector proponent, there won't be a pipeline.
I spoke to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith after the announcement this afternoon, but before news of Stephen Guilbeault's resignation. Premier, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here today.
Hello, David.
With this MOU and all of the conditional carve-outs from various policies, do you now have everything you need to secure a private sector proponent for a pipeline?
Well, I can tell you I put 9 bad laws on the table, and this one substantially repeals or revises 7 of them. We still have a little bit of work to do on plastics being declared as toxic. We're fighting that one out in court, and we're watching what happens with net zero cars. But I would say that getting rid of the emissions cap on our energy production, the net zero power grid, having a carve out in Alberta, that should launch us into a level of confidence in the private sector that should expand production. Not only of oil and gas, but also of electricity, so that we can build data centers. And that's, I think, the precondition that I've always said for getting a pipeline built. When the way we build pipelines in this country is that a private sector proponent lines up producers willing to ship on it. And now we've got, I think, that foundational confidence restoration that I have every confidence to believe that we'll be able to get some private sector projects built.
Every confidence to believe, but do you have indications from private sector proponents that with what is on the table here today, that they will start the process of maybe project planning and getting ready to maybe make a pitch to be your proponent, because you're looking for one by spring and summer of next year?
I can tell you we've got all the pipeline projects at the table as advisors to us as we sort through the technical aspects of which port we would be looking at, what route we would be looking at. I spoke with our Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute rep yesterday. We were going to use some AI to see if we could optimize what route would look like. We've got a lot of work to do still in making sure that we get the right route, do the proper consultation, and walk with industry to get to the point where we can get it on the major projects list. And I think once we've got there, that's when I would anticipate seeing a proponent step forward to take it the rest of the way. It says in the MOU that it will be a private sector pipeline. We're not asking the federal government to build it. We don't have the money to build it ourselves, but we will work in partnership with First Nations to get Indigenous ownership. And as I said, every expectation that once it's on the major projects list, that we will have one or more companies step forward to build it.
Okay, I want to go through a few of those things in a second, but I guess I need to understand, is this all or nothing? I get that it's no pipeline, no pathways, no pathways, no pipeline. So the carbon capture project and the pipeline are absolutely conditional. But the carve-out for clean electricity regulations, the no imposition of the emissions cap, your agreement to raise your carbon pricing to $130 a ton by 2030, I believe, is the target, and agreement on methane regulations, do those happen if there is no pipeline? Do the interties happen? Do the nuclear attempts happen if there is no pipeline, or does it all fall apart if the bitumen pipeline to the coast doesn't happen?
I have always said that addressing the laws that impair our investment climate were my #1 priority. I think that the best way to reach new markets is through a new pipeline that will go to the West Coast to reach those Asian markets. And you always need a new source of revenue if you're going to pay for a big project like Pathways. But I would say this, that we anticipate that with the changes that have been made, that there'll be a number of other projects that will go ahead. We've already heard that Enbridge is interested in expanding their main line by 400,000 barrels. TMX as well wants to optimize their line by 400,000 barrels. A project, incidentally, that Premier David Eby is also in support of. The South Bow Group, which owns the old Keystone assets, they are putting together a proposal for another 650,000 barrel pipeline. I've heard of projects that could go to the St. Lawrence Seaway, others that might go out through James Bay. So there's a lot of projects that now can go ahead on the basis of restoring the investment climate. And my focus is going to be on getting also that new market with the bitumen pipeline being built. So I think it's all of the above.
But the ones that are spelled out in the memorandum of understanding, thousands of megawatts of AI computing power, large transmission interties with British Columbia and Saskatchewan, for example, do those only go ahead if the pipeline goes ahead? Or are you willing to do those in isolation of because the pipeline could fail for lack of Indigenous consent, or any other reasons. But do the other components of this, which are the larger diversification and building components of the agreement, do those go ahead if the pipeline and pathways were to fail?
Well, what I would say is that the courts have determined that this is federal jurisdiction. There is no veto in the MOU, and the federal government is committed to working with us on getting a project on the major projects list. So that will proceed. But once again, the only way that you can get these projects built and have new production is by addressing the foundational problems with the bad laws that have been in place over the last 10 years. So I had a room full of probably about 150 people from the energy sector, from the power generation sector. They were pretty enthusiastic about what they heard. And so I would say that gives me some indication that there will be many, many projects that will proceed on this basis. The one we're most involved in as a proponent to get it to on the major projects list is a bitumen pipeline, because that's the one I think that is going to be the most difficult. It's the one that has been difficult in the past. It's the one where there needs to be a bit of proving on the part of industry. They want to be able to see that something can proceed of that nature. And that's why we're going to continue working on getting the Indigenous ownership buy-in, as well as working with Premier Eby to understand some of his concerns and address them.
Okay, I do want to move on to the Indigenous issues because time is tight, but it's still not clear to me whether this is all or nothing in the MOU. But you spoke with the Haisla. They have issued a statement saying they were firmly against Northern Gateway at the time and still maintain the same position today regarding an oil pipeline and an export facility in their territory. And this was articulated clearly to Premier Smith during the meeting. So the Haisla have made it very clear that it's a no from them. And I spoke with Marilyn Slett on the program last night, who's the president of Coastal First Nations. And she says David Eby is right, that if the tanker ban is diminished in any way, they will pull their support for the other projects that they have underway in British Columbia right now. How do you get them on board with those sorts of stakes and positions?
Well, look, I think the beginning is having a conversation, and we're very pleased that we had a very cordial conversation with the nation leadership yesterday, and we talked about areas of agreement. I mean, they have a vibrant, functioning port in Kitimat, and they do want to have more export opportunities, particularly for LNG, for propane, for all kinds of products that can come in on rail. And they wanted us to know that they want to do business with us, just not a bitumen pipeline, and that's fine. Part of the process we're going through is to find a suitable terminal point, and that hasn't been determined yet. We have to talk to everybody to make sure that we're doing this with due diligence and with respect, and that's the process that we've started. We know it'll be a longer process. I think we're targeting sometime in July to have our project submitted to the major project office. So there's still several more months of consultation that we have to do, but you don't get anywhere if you don't start talking, and that's what we're doing. We're talking and trying to find the concerns.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But I don't think it's opposition to a pipeline per se. As you mentioned, they're interested in LNG, but it is what's in the pipeline, and bitumen is a non-starter for them. So if it's not Kitimat, if it's not Prince Rupert, because those are difficult, those might be easier geographic paths, but politically they're very difficult. What other option is there to get to the BC coast other than a supercharged TMX?
Well, I'm not sure why you're rejecting the idea of the Port of Prince Rupert. That's certainly one that we're still actively having a look at and talking.
But that requires the tanker ban, right, Premier? Like that requires amendments to the tanker ban, and the Coastal First Nations have said they will pull their consent for the LNG projects and the other economic developments, if that were to happen. So like that seems a challenge.
David, I'm not going to negotiate with you on national television, but I am going to negotiate with those nations who have leadership who are interested in talking with us and who are sharing their concerns with us. And we've begun that. My Indigenous Relations Minister has already gone to several of the communities and spoken with many of the chiefs. And we're just going to continue doing that. But I can tell you that I've always said that this is a three-part process. The first part was getting rid of the 9 bad laws, and we managed to address 7 out of the 9. The other part was having a bitumen pipeline contingent on pathways and vice versa. And those two things are going to go ahead. But I can tell you by eliminating the emissions cap, by eliminating the net zero power regs, we know that is going to restore confidence in our economy. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of projects get announced in the meantime as a result of that. That's a win for Alberta, and it's a win for Canada.
You've agreed in return for the emissions cap to work on methane equivalency, to reduce methane emissions by 75% by 2035. That needs to be worked out. You've agreed under your tier system, which is your industrial carbon pricing system, to raise it from effectively where it's been frozen at about $95 a ton to $130 a ton. Is $130 a ton the ceiling for that price going forward, or is that a floor and it starts going up from there? Because in the federal budget, there's a lot of language about the need for a nationally consistent stringency that everyone needs to agree to and move in lockstep with. And I don't know if a permanent 130 does that. So is that a starting point for the tier pricing system as a result of all of this?
Well, as you have probably been able to see, where they do have carbon markets for instance, in Quebec, I think their price is down to $20 per ton. Ours has been at 95. So right now there isn't fairness. I understand that there are some projects that need a price of about $130 in order to be viable to invest in the technology. And that's the reason why we're going to have a negotiation on that front. We know that 170 by 2030 was too high, too fast. And I'm glad to see that the Prime Minister recognized that as well. But that's one of the agreements that we'll be working together on to develop a new approach. Yep. As of April 1st of next year.
Okay, I know you have to go, but does that mean 130 is a starting point? That's not the end point. It's what you've agreed to now, and it could potentially go up from there, because I think it's important for people to know if that's in their future in Alberta.
Well, the starting point is 95. And if you look at the scale that they were talking about it going up, it was going to go up to 170 by 2030. And that is not going to be the new scale. But we don't want people to be left in not knowing for too long a period of time, which is why we've agreed to come up with a pricing arrangement by April 1st. We've managed to negotiate these things before. I think we've got a more reasonable negotiating partner this time around. And I think there was just some indication that we were giving that it will be going up. It's not going to stay at 95, but we have to work out how quickly it can go up. You have to remember that there's a bit of a difference that's happened in the world economy over the last year, that some nations are not doing carbon pricing at all. And we have to make sure that our restrictions or our pricing is not so limiting that it would scare away investment. So it's certainly a balance, but we're prepared to have that conversation. And it looks like the Prime Minister is too.
Okay, as we let you go, did David Eby give you any indication in your conversation last night that there was anything you could put on the table that will convince him to support a bitumen pipeline?
Well, I can tell you that we're going to talk about the things we do agree on, which is interties and nuclear and expanding the Trans Mountain infrastructure and ammonia and more LNG capacity and export. And so I tend to try to find areas of agreement. You won't always find them 100% of the time, but I think we're going to be able to reset the relationship on the things that we do agree on. And I'll just keep on working on finding the route and a proponent for a bitumen pipeline.
Okay, Premier Danielle Smith, I have a million questions, but I know you got to go. Thank you for your time on a busy day.
You bet. We'll talk to you again.
I want to turn now to the province where this pipeline could ultimately end up if it goes ahead. And the Premier says he didn't have a seat at the table in these negotiations. Joining me now is David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia. Premier, we're doing this more and more frequently. Thank you for being available again today, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, David. There's a lot going on.
There sure is. The Memorandum of Understanding says Alberta and Ottawa will engage with British Columbia immediately. Engage, not agree necessarily. What's your interpretation of the language?
Yeah, I read the MOU pretty carefully, and what I was looking for was a couple of things. First of all, to understand what the implications were for British Columbia and for coastal First Nations, and what the plan is going forward. I'm going to take a step back You know, in British Columbia, we're really proud of the fact that we're leading the country in major projects. These are huge private sector investments. LNG Canada Phase 2 is the largest private sector investment in Canadian history, which will be made in the next year. And so that's why I'm a bit anxious about all of this. And when I was reading the agreement, particularly looking for the role of coastal First Nations, because those nations are their support or their tolerance of some of these huge projects that we're bringing forward for the national benefit and for British Columbia benefit, for families, to increase their buying power, to create jobs, all these things. All of it rests on us being able to do things quickly. And we are able to do things quickly because we have the support of the First Nations in this area. And so looking through this agreement, looking for that line about First Nations agreement and support, and I didn't see it there. But I was relieved to hear it, certainly in the House when the Prime Minister was speaking, that First Nations are going to have to agree and support these projects going forward. And I think when he engages with the coastal First Nations, he will hear a nation that has opposed heavy oil on the coast since 1977.
Right.
And this is a pretty cornerstone piece for that.
It says First Nations have to agree, Premier, but it doesn't say all First Nations have to agree, right? And that's what I wonder about, because Premier Danielle Smith has been very clear to say there are no vetoes in this, and the law is very clear that, you know, a province can't stop this if a federal government wants to push it through, and it's a consultation duty. It's not a total consent duty when it comes to speaking to First Nations. It's difficult to see from speaking to Marilyn Slett and others, and we heard from the Heisela today, that they will agree to this in any form. So, like, what is the path to get the agreement where there will be a buy-in and equity stake? Because it just seems to be that it's not a pipeline, it's what's in it, and they just don't want bitumen going into their land.
I mean, I think that's right. And the anxiety that I have is when we look at what our major projects are that we have on the board with the feds, talk about the Red Chris mine and the whole mining region in the Northwest. That relies on shipping things out of the Port of Stewart, which is partially owned by some of these coastal First Nations. The projects take place in Tahltan First Nations territory, are fed by the North Coast Transmission Line, which will be part owned by First Nations, so that we can build it quickly and electrify that. And then the LNG Canada Phase 2, Silism's LNG projects. Like, when you add these up, these are literally hundreds of billions of dollars, tens of thousands of jobs, income for the provincial and federal government, real projects with real proponents. And what we see is that they're being put at risk by a notional project. And you heard the energy minister, I think 3 or 4 times in your interview with him, say there is no pipeline yet. There's no project, there's no proponent, there's no money. And so, you know, I just say that the federal government needs to put a lens on these projects. What can we deliver that's going to make a meaningful difference for families and Canadians in terms of their buying power, in terms of high-paid jobs? And by any of those metrics, the BC projects come out on top, and you would never put them at risk for a proposal that has no money. I mean, the Prime Minister, in an aside at the Board of Trade in Calgary, was joking, are there any proponents here who are willing to step up? I mean, he's joking, but joking aside, there's no proponent. There's no private sector company that's willing to say, hey, we'll do this, or we'll buy it if you build it. Right. We actually have a pipeline for sale right now that's owned by taxpayers that nobody wants to buy.
Well, when I put some of these concerns to the minister, he said a few times, take a breath, right? Like, there is no pipeline, it's an MOU and these things, and that, you know, all of that is true. But Danielle Smith is going to push hard. She's not going to take a breath. She's going to go try to find a private sector proponent, and there's going to be this engagement process going to start. He confirmed he's flying to see you tomorrow. Minister Hodgson is. After you take a breath and speak to him tomorrow, what is it you need to hear from the energy minister that reassures you that your industrial agenda isn't at risk and they really have a plan to get the First Nations on board?
The key piece here, David, is that we keep our eye on the prize as Canadians. And the prize is an economy that is less dependent on the U.S., that has access to global markets, that builds trade relationships overseas, and that grows prosperity for families. And as long as we're focused on those goals, there will be no challenge. But my concern about this project is that, as proposed by Premier Smith, this pipeline project, it's going to be an energy vampire for limited federal attention, resources, legislation, efforts, when we really need federal attention on projects that are reaching final investment decision in the next year or two. that are actually going to deliver these kinds of results.
Right.
And so that's my message is, I watched the Nutrien decision where a huge potash company in Saskatchewan decided to ship potash out of Washington State instead of British Columbia. I should have been sitting down with the Premier of Saskatchewan, with the federal government, the transportation minister, and working with them to address bottlenecks to access BC ports so that Nutrien can make the decision to ship out of BC. But instead, the Premier of Saskatchewan was meeting with the Premier of Alberta to talk about a project that doesn't exist. And that's what I mean when I say real projects are at risk, and we have to stay focused as a country, and we can't miss these opportunities.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is alleging that the Prime Minister and the federal government really have no intention of building a pipeline, and the MOU is meaningless in his words, and ultimately your province has a veto on this. I know you said earlier today you know you don't have a veto here, you can't legally stop it. Do you believe they're intent on building a pipeline here, finding a proponent and getting this done? Because there is agreement here to refer this to the Major Projects Office, give it a national project designation under the Build Canada Act. I mean, what is your view? Do you think this is a real priority and intention and not just show, as Mr. Poilievre is alleging?
No question, David. If there was a private proponent, if there was a route, if they were applying for permits right now, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the federal government would be advancing that project in partnership with Alberta. But that is absolutely not the case. And neither Mr. Poilievre or any political leader at any level can materialize a company that is interested in either building or buying this project. They are going to really struggle, independent of that, getting coastal First Nations support for this and not imperiling tens of billions of dollars of investment in just one project, the LNG Canada project that's coming to final investment decision in, we hope, late next year. So, it doesn't matter your political stripe, it doesn't change the reality on the ground. And I think that's the lens that we all have to apply to this.
Well, just one last topic to touch on with you, Premier. I'm reading Stephen Guilbeault's resignation letter from Cabinet, and it reads in some respects almost like a transcript of the press conferences you've held over the past week. He opposes the Memorandum of Understanding, the lack of consultation with British Columbia, the lack of consultation with Indigenous nations on the West Coast. He says a pipeline to the West Coast would have major environmental impacts, contribute to a significant increase in climate pollution, and move Canada further away from its greenhouse gas reduction targets. I just wonder, what are your thoughts on Minister, well, now ex-Minister Guilbeault's resignation and what this could mean politically and more broadly when someone like this says they've gone too far? The
former Minister Guilbeault made the decision that he felt he had to make, and I won't wade into internal federal Liberal politics. But I will say for any politician, and I include myself in this, if you want to achieve what Canadians are expecting us to achieve, the focus must be on the issues of affordability, high-paid jobs, and opportunity for this country and increased independence from the United States. And we have to pursue those projects that are going to be able to deliver that. And political posturing and projects that are not going to get built, or even on the most optimistic take, will not be built for a decade. It's not going to get us there. We need to be focused on delivering for Canadians, and that's my commitment to British Columbians and to all Canadians.
Do you think Minister Guilbeault is right, though, that this makes it a whole lot harder for Canada to meet its environmental goals, and already Ontario is asking for carve-outs, just like Alberta got? I know BC has been a leader on some of this. What are your thoughts on that warning from the ex-minister?
Well, when I reviewed the agreement, there were a number of really significant commitments from the federal government to Alberta about climate policy from the federal government that have significant implications for British Columbia. So, for example, we have really stringent methane regulations in our province. We've reduced rogue methane emissions from our LNG projects by 60%. And we're really proud of that. We worked with industry hard to get there. It costs them money to do that. And so if Alberta is not held to the same standard as British Columbia is, we're in a competitive industry. The gas will come from Alberta instead of from British Columbia. And what we end up doing is we lower the bar instead of raising it and asking for a higher standard. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to have to raise with the Prime Minister and with the Premier of Alberta, is ensuring that we're on the same page around ensuring high standards around methane emissions and other pieces. I noted that the oil and gas cap was a casualty of this agreement. That has implications for British Columbia moving forward forward. We'll have to figure out with the federal government what our plan is there. There were some really significant pieces in this agreement for us that we don't fully understand all the implications of, and we're going to have to work out with the Prime Minister.
Okay. Well, David Eby, we'll look forward to hearing the outcome of your meeting tomorrow with Minister Hodgson. That's David Eby, Premier of British Columbia. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Thanks, David. A pleasure.